Hello and welcome back to another Shadowshaper Duels video. A few days ago I put out a video on the most broken card in Shadowshaper Duels, which is this card here that is favoured. That video got quite a lot of attention, and if you haven't already seen it, I would suggest go watch that first before you watch this one. Essentially what I'm going to do in the video today is explain how you can try and counter this card. I did mention two of the ways in my previous video, but the third way, which I did not mention, is actually the only guaranteed way to counter this, at least as far as I've discovered at the moment. Whereas the other two ways, there is a way to avoid them. Just as a very quick summary for what this card does, when it acquires a buff of any sort, it grants +2 to one of your hive units. And the reason why this is broken is if this is your only hive unit, or if you've played two of these, but they are your only hive units, they will just buff themselves. And then because they have acquired a bonus, they will buff themselves again. And it creates this looping effect where they just increase in power a lot. And there isn't really, a way to stop that. A lot of people are playing these as their only hive units in either just other decks which have nothing to do with hive, maybe with fallen cards, just playing normally and then suddenly dropping these near the end of the game, or they're playing them in decks with lots of cards that can buff it to try and reach ridiculously high numbers. So I'm going to now explain the three different ways you can counter this, and I've built a deck designed to counter this, where I'm not even using this card myself. It is a deck designed just to try and counter it, because now that I've reached rank 17, I'm finding a lot more people playing this. So actually I'm having more success trying to counter them rather than doing the strategy myself. So the first two ways you can counter this, which are the most obvious, and the two that I did mention in the previous video, first of all is using Wu Ming, because he will just suppress a unit. So you can let the opponent, get the ogre really high, and then you just suppress it, and it will reset its power back down to its default 3 value. And even if your opponent has played 2 ogres, as long as you suppress one of them, it breaks the chain, because as soon as the non-suppressed ogre buffs the suppressed one, it can't buff it back. The chain is broken, and you will see that in the first example game I'm going to play after this explanation. The second way you can counter this is using Wolf, as long as you have got 5 cards on your field, because Wolf will just instantly destroy a unit over 5 power. Those ogres will almost certainly be over 5 power at the point you're wanting to destroy them. So as long as you have got enough cards on your field, you can destroy them. The big problem, however, with both of these counters is that you can only really play them if you are the person who goes second, if you are the one defending. And if you're not, if you are the person attacking, any smart opponent who is playing the ogre will just wait until round 6, play the ogre, maybe play 2 of them, with some way to buff them. They may have already set up something like a Pandora in advance to buff them, but even then they probably don't need to do 2. They could just play the ogre, play something to buff the ogre, and there is nothing you can then do to counter it, because they are the person who goes last. So they do it, the round ends, the game ends, you have no way to suppress or delete that ogre with either Wu Ming or Wolf. So trying to fight against this card, if you go first, is very difficult. There is, however, one strategy you can use to counter it, which comes from the most probably unlikely place, and it is using rocks. So I did put out a video yesterday on it was a video just on the Wu Ming vendor in general, but as part of that video I built a deck using Luxus and revolving around putting rocks on my opponent's front row to buff Luxus, and that gave me an idea for how to counter this ogre. So I've taken that same deck from yesterday's video, made some slight changes to it, and this is now set up to counter the ogre strategy. And essentially, in case you didn't watch the video from yesterday, on Luxus, you want to try and get as many rocks on your opponent's front row as possible, because the idea here is your opponent can't play the ogre if you've already filled up their front row with rocks. If we go back and look at the ogre, I've gone too far. It is here. It needs to be played on the front row. So if I can fill up my opponent's front row with rocks, then they can't play it. And that is essentially what this deck is trying to do. So I have 2 lots of common cover, which when I play them on my front row, it places 2 rocks in the opponent's front row. And I have 2 Zers, which is when my Zer acquires a buff, it places a rock in the opponent's front row. And I've got 2 of each of these to try and have as many methods as possible of getting rocks on the field. Common Cover is a card you unlock from rank 5 from Wu Ming, and Zer is a card you can acquire by beating Atta on Jiangxi Metro at level 15. So by the time you start matching people who are playing the Ogre, you have to be rank 16 to have unlocked the Ogre. You should be nearly rank 15 yourself, if not already, so you can acquire Zer. So you can already acquire both of these cards to counter him. And the rest of my deck is basically built around that. So I still have 2 Wu Mings because they are great at just shutting down the Ogre if I get the chance. If I'm the person going second, they can just shut it down. Or I can use them to disable other cards like a Pandora and stop him buffing his Ogre. I have 2 of these just because I needed some level 1 cards to put on the front, and they go well with the rock gameplay. I have 3 cards down here designed, well technically I have 4, designed around providing buffs. I have 2 of these, which grant power to units, 3 units at a line. I have this, which grants power to a unit, and then I have Pandora, which provides a sustained power buff to a unit. All of these are to be played, in some way with my Zer, to spawn rocks. And then I also have some Vandals in my deck. To be honest, having done the games, I think there are better cards I could swap these out for. I didn't really know what to put in, but actually if I was going to make a change to this deck now, I would probably swap out one of the Vandals for, sorry, I've gone past it, for a Ning Fei, because Ning Fei will randomly place a clone in the opponent's front row. And a clone is kind of like an exploding shank, apart from it only explodes when you damage it. And given I have no ways to even damage it, it's just an extra way of getting something in my opponent's front row and trying to fill it up. So I think I would probably swap out one of these Vandals for a Ning Fei, and then I might swap out the other one for a Hyssop, just to have another method of providing a buff, which only costs 2 energy instead of 3. So again, I might be able to play this on a Zer that has already been buffed once, just to buff it again and spawn another rock. So yeah, in the gameplay you're going to see I have Vandals, but if I was going to make a change, I would probably swap out one of them, and I would swap out the other one for a Ning Fei. Not that I really think it changes the outcome of any of the games you're going to see. And then finally, I had Luxus in my deck just because I thought, well, given I am playing, the whole idea of this deck is to play rocks, this at least might be a good way for me to get a high power bonus. Usually, hopefully, in maybe 8 or 10, depending on how many rocks I've managed to get down. So I'm almost treating this as like my hero card for the deck, even though it's not even the highest power card. Well, it's the joint highest power card, and it only has 4 power to deploy it. Just because it goes with the rock gameplay. So yeah, essentially the strategy to counter the Ogre is fill up your opponent's front row with rocks before round 6, so that if they are doing the smart thing and saving the Ogre till the later rounds, it's too late, they can't play it. And maybe you pressure them into playing it early, because they see their front row starting to fill up and don't want to miss it. And then, if they do play it early, hopefully you have a Wu Ming ready to suppress it. That is basically the idea. It's a pressure them into playing it early, and then hopefully either cut them off from doing it or suppress them when they do play it early. So what I'm going to let run now are 3 games where I've played with this deck, well, the deck that had the 2 Vandals in it. I didn't realise at the time, until watching the recordings back, that I actually matched the same opponent all 3 times. Had I known that, I would have at least known what cards he had to play, but I didn't realise. But I matched the same opponent all 3 times. I am going first all 3 times, meaning I'm the attacker, which gives him a great advantage, if he can try and save his ogres to round 6. And as you'll see, he does have ogres in his deck. But yeah, I still managed to come away with 2 wins and a draw from those 3 games. So I let those 3 games run now, and you can see the different strategies at play. And the first game, is the first game I probably should have lost had he played it a bit smarter, but he went early with his ogre. And the reason why I've included that first game is not so much to showcase the strategy of the counterattack, because I think in that game the counterattack just would not have worked, but to show that if your opponent plays an ogre early and you manage to suppress it, then that will stop the chaining effect even if they have a second ogre. Which is why, in my opinion, Wooming is actually a little bit better than Wolf, because Wolf would just remove that ogre from the field. He could then still play a second one and have the same result. Whereas if that first ogre is still on the field but suppressed, it will break the strategy even if he has a second ogre. So I'm going to stop talking now and I'll let those 3 gameplays play, and then I'll speak to you for a little bit at the end. And I'm going first as well. So I don't know whether he's going to play the ogre strategy or not, but he certainly should have the card unlocked. Thankfully, I have a Zerv, I have a Pandora, I have a Wu Ming, so I might be able to make something happen here that can counter him. He's skipping the turn. That is an interesting side. It means he might well be waiting until later in the game and then playing the ogre. I have no sign of a Lucas yet on my hand, which is not good. I would like to try and get a Lucas to, hopefully get a big buff if I get a lot of rocks on his front. I think he definitely is going to play the ogre strategy here because he's waiting. He's probably waiting for his round 6. Given he goes last, he's going to wait for round 6. Smart play on his play to disable Zer. He's getting that ready for his ogre on the next round, I can tell. He might play the ogre this round. He might play it on round 6. He's played it this round. To be honest, he should have played it on round 6. So what I'm going to do now on my next turn, which is my last turn, I'm going to use... Oh, that's great. I got a Zer. I'm going to use Wu Ming to disable his ogre. That's the first obvious play. which will remove its power. And then, so as much as I would like to play the Zur, there isn't much point because it's my last round and all it's going to do is give him a rock, although it is a power 7 card. Maybe I will. I'll play the Zur. Actually, I could play the Zur in a place where it's not going to give him a rock. And then I'm going to use one of my Sniper Vandals just to deal a bit of damage. Even if he has a second Ogre now and plays it next to the Pandora, it will not create the chain effect he's looking for. Yep, you see what I mean? And he's going to buff it. But it buffs the Ogre that's suppressed and stops it. And there we go. I just won. And I didn't even have a Lukix, but I won against the Ogre strategy. Start in hand, because I have a Zur, a Wu Ming, a Lukix, some cover. So, lots of good things here. Once again, I'm going first, which is a disadvantage for this strategy. Because, you know, if he saves his Ogre and a way to buff it to the last round, there's basically nothing I can do to counter it. So I just need to try and fill up his front row as much as I can with rocks before we get to that stage. Interesting that he's skipping. I'm going to do the same here. Maybe I could play the Zur, but then there's a chance he might Wu Ming it. Plus, I don't yet have a way to buff Zur. Okay, now I have 2 Zurs. Get some rocks down. He's going to do the same. I'm now going to play my Pandora, hoping that next round I will be able to play both a Zur and the cover. He may choose to use a Wu Ming and disable my Pandora, if he has one. He's not. He's playing his own Pandora. This is great. So I'm going to play a Zur next to my Pandora, and I'm also going to play cover. That is now his front row filled up. So even if he had an Ogre, there is nowhere he can play it. Doesn't matter. You can destroy my Zur all you want. It's done its job and got the rocks on your front row. See, he did have the Ogre, and he's had to play it on the back row because there's nowhere he can play it. So now I'm going to play Lucas for a big buff. And then, I mean, at this point, it really doesn't matter what I play. I think I've won anyway. But just because it's the card that gives me the highest power, I'm going to play another Zur. That just took a lot. I think that took 10. So I'm now down to 39. Is there anything you can play that buffs for 9? we draw. And you know what? Against an ogre strategy going first, I'll take a draw. Okay, so I've just matched against a level 19, and I'm also going first, so that's not the best start. Although I do see Zers and cover, and I have a Wooming, so if he has an ogre, I've got a counter to it. I just need to try and fill his front up with rocks now, before it gets to round 6. It's not good that he suppressed my Zer. It would have been really good on the next round if I could have played the Zer and then played this guy to buff both of them. But unfortunately, that's not going to be possible. My only hope is he's saving his ogres for round 6. And I might still have the possibility of blocking his front row with rocks before then. My play next round is basically going to be play Pandora next to my Zer and Wooming on his Zer. Hopefully that fills his front row with rocks and it disables his Zer. He's getting that ready for his ogre. Although, no, he can't be, because you can't play an ogre on the back row. If he did have an ogre to play, he can't play it anymore. I win. I guess I'll never know whether he had an ogre to play, but I filled up his front row nevertheless. Made it this far. Thank you for sticking around and watching the example gameplays. I just want to quickly close out this video by summarising the games we have just seen and providing my closing thoughts on the ogre card and this strategy in general. So just as a quick recap, in game 1, my opponent played the ogre early, and we saw that by suppressing an ogre but leaving it on the field, that will break the strategy even if they have a second ogre. My opponent really should have been smarter and saved his ogre for round 6, and if he did, he probably would have won that game, because I hadn't done a good job of filling up his row. I'd got really unlucky with my rock spawning cards. In game 2, as you hear me say, a tie is still a good result against someone who is trying to abuse this ogre card, and when they get to go second. So yeah, I don't really think there was much difference I could have done in that game. I played it as well as I could. I got an okay hand, and I managed to fill up his front row. He just also had some high power cards, and it was a tie. But had I not been playing this strategy where I filled up his front row, I almost certainly would have lost, because he would have just played the ogre in the front row and won. The only reason I got a tie is because I managed to fill up his front row and completely block it, which, as you saw, he then did play his ogre on, I believe it was round 6, but he had to play it on the back row, and so it did nothing. It couldn't use its power. I think he'd probably learnt from his previous mistake from game 1, where he played it too early and I suppressed it. So this time he was being sure to leave it for round 6, and he ended up leaving it too late. And then in round 3, which I won, I think that was just probably a better version of game 2. My opponent never actually played his ogre, but obviously, given it is the same opponent, I know he has 2 in his deck. I don't know whether he just got unlucky and didn't draw them, or maybe he was again waiting until round 6, learning from his mistake in game 1. And by the time it got to round 6, I had managed to fully block his front row to stop him being able to play them. And also, if he had been tempted to play them early, which again I'll never know whether he had them in his hand and he was waiting, or whether he just didn't have them, but had he been tempted to play them early like he did in round 1, I had a Wooming ready to suppress it. So I think either way, on that game 3, I did a very good job of countering it, and there was not really much he could do to win it when he was going for that strategy. So I've just shown 3 games where I come away with 2 wins and a draw, but I do want to close out by saying I still do think this ogre card is broken, because this strategy of filling up the front row is the only way I have had any sort of success in countering it where my opponent gets to go second, and really that is what it comes down to. If I get to go second, then a Wooming works great to suppress it. But if I'm the one going first, there is very little you can do if your opponent is waiting for round 6, unless you do this strategy. And although I've shown these 3 games where I've had success, I have had plenty of games where by the time it gets to round 6, I have not managed to fill up the front row, just like I did in round 1, in game 1, and then they play the ogre on round 6 and they win. And I just, I'd got unlucky with my rock spawning cards. I've had games where I'm the one going second, but I've not managed to fill up his front row either way, and I've also not managed to get a Wooming in my hand, which is a bit unlucky. And even though he plays the ogre on round 6 but goes before me, I still don't have a way to counter it. I've also matched with other people who are below rank 16, so don't even have the ogre. But because my deck is set up to try and counter that ogre, and actually I don't end up with that high of a power bonus myself, they just play a normal game, probably with the Fallen and the Vanok hero card. They get lots of Fallen down, and then they win because they've played their game normally, and I'm set up to counter a completely different playstyle, which was not needed for them and actually put me at a disadvantage. So yeah, I still do think the ogre card is broken. I imagine it is probably not working as intended, and hopefully will be fixed, because otherwise, you're forced into running a strategy like I've shown here to counter it. And I don't think that's fun. I think, the ogre is a cool card, and, it has a good ability where maybe it should be able to buff other hive, like intended, or maybe just buff itself once. But I think having one card be able to achieve such high power is not really balanced. And there's very few ways to counter it, as I've shown in this video. So thank you for watching, and if you are starting to reach rank 15, 16 and coming up against this ogre, hopefully you find this video helpful for how to build a deck to try and counter it.